Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we are learning Daf Mem Zayin of Masechta Shabbis. Quick overview before we begin. So the Daf is going to begin talking about Bassis. What's a Bassis? Bassis is when you have something that is, we talked about it yesterday at the end, but when you have muktzeh on or in something else, the thing that it is in becomes sort of a base for that is supporting this muktzeh, and therefore the question is, can you move the thing that is holding the muktzeh object? And we're going to discuss building a bed or other things that are made up of little pieces. So you're not necessarily like nailing it together or anything, but you're sort of constructing it. Almost maybe think of like Legos or something like that, although I'm sure that that's its own question. But some kind of like, bed or kli that you piece together. Can you do that? And we're going to talk about grama a little bit, which is cool, right? When you cause something to happen, specifically in the context of extinguishing a fire. If you don't exactly extinguish a fire, but you kind of, set up the stage so that fire will be extinguished. We'll learn about that. We will begin a new Perek, the fourth Perek of Masechta Shabbis, Bamet Tomnin. So we will begin that, and we will discuss just that. Insulating with things that increase heat on Shabbos, which has come up in the past, but now we are going to have an entire Perek dedicated to this exciting topic. Without further ado, let's do it, friends. Alright, the second line of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Here we go. Amr Reb Zera. Says Reb Zera. Amr Reb Asi, Amr Reb Yochanan, Amr Reb Chanina, Amr Reb Romanus. Cool. So this whole long line of people stay quoting other people. Right? So Reb Zera says the name of Reb Asi, who says the name of Reb Yochanan, who says the name of Reb Chanina, who says in the name of a certain Rabbi Romanus, which is interesting. It's not a very common name that you find in the Gemara. And said Rabbi Romanus, Li hitir Rebbe litalto machta be'afra. So Romanus says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi allowed him to carry on Shabbos an incense, now I'm forgetting the word. I think it's called a censer. I think that's what it's called. Oh gosh. Well, if it's not called a censer, if I'm messing up that word, I'm just going to keep on using the wrong word. But it's like this kind of kli that you would put like incense in it, and then you would burn the incense in that kli, and there were like holes on the top, and the smoke would come out, and you would smell it. So Rabbi Romanus says that Rebbe allowed him to carry this incense censer that was filled with ashes left over from incense. And the point in the Chiddush being that ashes mistamar are muktzeh, yet Rabbi Romanus claims that Rebbe allowed him to move around this censer that had ashes in it, since the censer itself is a kli, and you could move around this kli. Right, Rashi says in the Dibra Maschil Amar Romanus, right? So he says about halfway through the Rashi, Vashma'inan, and he's letting us know the agav machta, the ikatoris kli alel tiltla im afra, that because of the censer, right, meaning the ashes themselves are muktzeh. There's nothing you can do with them, right? They're pointless. They're muktzeh. However, since the censer has a Torah's kli on it, so therefore you would be allowed to move the censer even though the ashes are inside of it. Amr le Reb Zera. So Reb Zera said to Rabbi Asi. Amr le Reb Zera le Rabbi Asi. So Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Asi, Mi Amr Reb Yochanan hachi? 1 second. One second. Would Rabbi Yochanan really say that you'd be allowed to move this censer that has ash in it, which is muktzeh? V'atnan, but we learn in the Mishnah. Notel adam b'no, okay, a person's allowed to carry his son. Ve'evan biyado, even though his son is carrying a stone. Now the stone is muktzeh. But he'd be allowed to carry his son, even though his son is carrying the stone. O kalkala va'evan b'socha, or you'd be allowed to move a basket, even though there's a stone in the basket. Okay. Now Rabbi Bar Chana said, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that when Rabbi Yochanan says that you're allowed to move when the Mishnah says that you are allowed to move this basket that has a stone in it, well, it's only talking about a basket that actually was filled with fruits. And there was also a stone in it. Now, the only reason why you're allowed to move this basket is precisely because of all of those fruits that are inside of it. You have a basket, it's filled with fruits. Oh yeah, and there happens to be a stone in there as well. So the stone, you're still allowed to move the basket because you're really moving it for the fruits, right? Because you're allowed to move it on account of the fruits, and the stone is not going to mess that up. However, if it would simply be a basket that all it contained was a muktzeh stone, you would not be allowed to move the basket. So how come it doesn't make sense that Rabbi Yochanan would be quoting Rebbe or be quoting this, statement claiming that you can move an incense censer which contains only ash? Since if the ash is muktzeh, well, that would be similar to a basket that contains only a stone, which we have a Mishnah that says that you're not allowed to move it. And Mistama, the same would apply to an incense censer that contains only ash. Ishtomam kisha chada. So the Gemara quotes, takes a phrase from a pasuk in Daniel, and the phrase is Ishtomam kisha chada, that he remained quiet, contemplative for an hour. I don't know if it literally means an hour, but basically Rabbi Asi was thinking, right? Rabbi Zera asked him a good kasha. How could it be that Rabbi Yochanan would be quoting Rebbe ultimately as saying that you can move an incense censer that contains only muktzeh ash inside of it? V'amar, and then after he was done thinking, he said, okay, I have an answer for you. Hachanami de'izba karton. Here also, it's talking about where it wasn't just muktzeh ash inside of that censer. There was also some leftover frankincense that didn't get burnt. And because there was also some leftover frankincense, that is why you're allowed to move the censer, for the leftover frankincense. And then once you're carrying it for the leftover frankincense, it's okay that there's ash in there as well. It'll therefore be similar to the basket that has fruits in it, and there's also a stone. Amar Abaye. But Abaye responded to Rabbi Asi's response, and he said, Kartin beRebbi michashive? But one second. Rebbe was an extremely fancy individual. I think it says in some Gemara somewhere that, even though he was really fancy, he never got any hana from Olam Hazeh, which is pretty cool. But in any event, Rebbe was a really fancy person. He was wealthy. He was the Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people. Leftover frankincense is not chashuv for him. It's not significant in Rebbe's household, and therefore, the fact that you have a censer with a little bit of leftover frankincense in there will not be significant enough to say that, oh yeah, he's moving the censer because there was some, significant non-muktzeh items in there, and then once there's ash in there, you can move it, as a consequence. But in this case, like in Rebbe's household, leftover frankincense, it would not be significant enough to warrant you to be able to carry around this censer, this incense censer, with a bunch of leftover frankincense and ash. But maybe we'll say, yeah, sure, maybe in Rebbe's house, some leftover frankincense isn't really significant, but for a poor person, leftover frankincense could be very nice, right? Maybe in general they don't have any frankincense, and a little bit of frankincense could be nice. So maybe since for a poor person, a little bit of frankincense is significant enough. So therefore, even, we say that therefore even by Rebbe, a little bit of frankincense would be significant enough to allow him to move this censer. But v'atanya, bigdi aniyim la'aniyim, bigdi ashirim la'ashirim, v'adanim la'ashirim lo. No, this is something that came up a few weeks ago on daf something. Where did it come up? came up somewhere a few weeks ago that, where did this come up? It came up on Daf Chav Vav Mebez. In the context of the Shalosh al Shalosh Etzbaos, right? So we said that a garment that is 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths is significant for a poor person, but not for a wealthy person. And therefore, for a wealthy person, it would only be Mekabel Tumah if it's 3 Tfachim by 3 Tfachim, because that's significant. He won't throw away a piece of cloth that's 3 Tfachim by 3 Tfachim. But for a poor person, even if it's 3 Etzbaos by 3 Etzbaos, it would be significant enough to be Mekabel Tumah. However, by a wealthy person, if it's 3 Etzbaos by 3 Etzbaos, it would not be significant enough to be Mekabel Tumah. So we see a precedent where something, just because something is fit for a poor person, doesn't mean that, so it's fit for a wealthy person as well. Right? And therefore, says the Gemara, right? But we learn in a Brisa, big de aniyim la aniyim, that garments of poor people are relevant for poor people, big de ashirim la ashirim, and garments for wealthy people are relevant for wealthy people, avad aniyim la ashirim lo. But garments that are significant enough for a poor person would not be considered significant enough for a wealthy person. And therefore, to apply that here, just because frankincense a little bit of leftover frankincense that didn't get consumed by the fire might be significant for a poor person, it won't be considered significant by Rebbe's house, where it was a very wealthy household. So Ella Amar Abaye. So and how does Abaye, so if he asks the kasha, so he should provide an answer. Well, he does. So rather, Abaye says, you know why you were allowed to move this incense censer? Mididhava agraf shel rei. For the same reason that you're allowed to move a bedpan, right? If you have a container that somebody went to the bathroom in, so you would be allowed to, you're allowed to move it out of the house on Shabbos because it's disgusting, and you're allowed to get it out of the house. And therefore, Abaye, right? And that's the same reason why we're allowed to take out garbage on Shabbos, and it's not considered muktzeh. Maybe you could say also, maybe garbage shouldn't even, no, the opposite. Like maybe even Reb Shimon would agree that maybe garbage is muktzeh because it's completely useless, maybe. I don't know. Whatever, Reb Shimon. Anyways, so you're allowed to remove this graf shel rei on Shabbos. So therefore, Abaye wants to say that's why you're allowed to move around this incense censer, because all you have in there is ash, and this ash you don't even want to look at it on Shabbos. Ash. Therefore, you could, right? You don't want ash lying around your house, so you can move it around. Okay, it's not muktzeh. Amar Rava shtei tshuvas b'davar. Rava says to Abaye, meh. He says, I don't agree with your analysis that an incense censer with ash in it is like a bedpan, is like a graf shel rei. Chada, reason number 1, is graf shel rei ma'is v'hailo ma'is. He says, look, a bedpan, a graf shel rei is objectively disgusting. That's why you want to get it out of your house. Ash from leftover incense, maybe it's inconvenient, but it's not disgusting. It's not going to make you vomit, right? V'od, and more so, graf shel rei migale v'hai michase. Graf shel rei is revealed. It's open. You could see it. It's gross. You don't want it around, so you can take it out of the house. An incense censer, it's closed. It's a container that has some holes in the top so that the smoke can come out, but you don't even see that there's ash in there. So it's not exactly a graf shel rei. Ella Amar Rava. So Rava gives his own answer. Ki avinun be Rav Nachman. He says, we were by the household of Rav Nachman, another wealthy patron and Torah scholar. Hav metatlinan kanuna agav kitma. V'afagav de'ika ale shivrei eitzim. So says Rava, when we were by the houses of Rav Nachman, we would move around like a stove that was used for heat. And even though it was, but because it was filled with ash, they would use this ash from this stove that they would use for, to cover up, says Rashi says spit and soa, excrement. So they would basically, so this ash, actually, in this case, this wasn't muktzeh ash. This was actually ash that was specifically prepared in advance, that you knew that you were going to be using this ash, to be covering things up on Shabbos. And therefore the ash itself was not, muktzeh. And they would be allowed to, and they would move around this stove, I assume it wasn't lit. It was already out, I guess. And they moved around this stove so that they can use the ash. And even though there were wood chips in there, pieces of wood, and those pieces of wood are muktzeh on Shabbos. And even so, they were still allowed to move around the ash. And therefore, Rava wants to argue that this is what the incense censer is talking about, where it was an incense censer that had ash, and the ash was actually useful, but there were wood chips in there, and the wood chips were muktzeh. And what he was saying, what Rebbe was saying is that you're allowed to move, and Rabbi Yochanan was quoting him, that you're allowed to move the incense censer that's filled with ashes, even though there are some wood chips in there. And that would essentially be also similar to the basket that has fruits in it, but also a stone. Meisvei. We have Episakasha. Vishavin. Both Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda agree. Shem yeshba shivrei psila she'aser l'taltala. Ay. Reb Shimon again. Reb Shimon when it comes to muktzeh. Reb Shimon, we spent like the last 3 days or something, jumping back and forth between saying, Reb Shimon doesn't hold of muktzeh. Reb Shimon holds of muktzeh in this case. So here's another case. So both Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda agree that, so even though Reb Shimon says that you would be allowed to move a candle that is no longer lit, even though Reb Yehuda says that you would not because it's muktzeh machmas meus, Reb Shimon says, no way, it's fine, you can move it. However, even Reb Shimon admits that if there is, shivrei psila, that if some of the wick broke off and fell into that kli, well then that wick, I guess since it's useless, would be considered muktzeh, and therefore you would no longer be allowed to move the kli. You no longer be allowed to move this kli. So now I think pshat here is that we're saying that, therefore, even according to Reb Shimon, right? So normally you would be allowed to move this kli because it's not muktzeh, and I guess that it's a kli that also has some leftover oil in it, I guess. However, there's also some of this wick in there, and the wick is muktzeh, and we're saying that as long as there is this, broken wick inside of the kli, you can no longer move it. But shouldn't this at least be similar to like the basket that has fruit and also a stone in there? So here also, let's say at least according to Reb Shimon, that he says that you're allowed to use move a ner yashan. Well, you have this ner yashan, you have oil in there, whatever leftover oil is in there, and there's also this wick, and Reb Shimon all of a sudden says that you're not allowed to move this candle because there's broken wick in there. That would sound like even though you have this candle and you have oil, so I should be allowed to move it on account of the oil, and the wick should be bottled to the oil, right? So why are we saying that, let's say by the fruit, you're allowed to move the fruit even though there's a stone in there? So Amabai beglila shanu. So Abai says that was talking about, I assume Galila being the Galilee, right? That was talking about the Galilee where they didn't have access to linen. They didn't have a lot of access to linen. And because they didn't have access to so much linen, so they had to preserve their wicks, which are made out of linen. And therefore, in that case, even this broken wick is significant because they're going to want to keep it and hold on to it for future use. And therefore, it's not going to be batel to the oil that is in the candle. And even Reb Shimon would say, look, this linen wick is muktzeh, and it's not going to be batel to the oil that's in the candle, and therefore you're not going to be allowed to move the candle because it's a bassis for this muktzeh broken wick. But in general, when it comes to, let's say, a basket full of fruit, so that stone is batel to the fruit because it's really not significant. Okay, interesting. Let's go weiter, friends. Levi bar Shmuel ashkachinu l'Rabbi Abba u'Rav Huna bar Chia davu kaimei apischa debei Rav Huna. So Levi bar Shmuel found Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia, who were hanging out by the entrance to the Beis Medrash of Rav Huna. Okay. Now Amalu. So Levi bar Shmuel asked Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia, Ma'ulach zermita shel trasim b'Shabbos. So Rashi gives two options for what these trasiim are. One of them is like copper smiths. The other option is that they were weavers. But either way, they were people that would travel for their work. They would travel from town to town, and they would take a bed with them. And this was a bed that you can easily kind of take apart and put back together, so you can have a place, something to sleep on. So Levi Bar Shmuel wanted to know, on Shabbos, can you basically reconstruct this bed? You're not taking out your hammers and nails and all sorts of fancy tools. No, you're literally just like, constructing it by just putting the pieces together, and that's it. So Amar Shapir Dami. Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia said to Levi Bar Shmuel, yeah, it's cool. You can reconstruct such a bed. So also the comment of Rav Yehuda, and then Levi Bar Shmuel came to Rav Yehuda, Omar, and Rav Yehuda responded to Levi Bar Shmuel, Harav Shmuel Damir Tavayo Machzor Mita Shel Trasim B'Shabbos Chayav Chatas. So Rav Yehuda said that both Rav and Shmuel say that somebody who reconstructs this kind of bed on Shabbos would be chayav a korban chatas. So how come Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia said that you're allowed to reconstruct it, yet we see that Rav and Shmuel both say that you wouldn't? So Meizvei, we have a kasha against Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia. Hamachzer kaneh menorah b'Shabbos, chayav chatas. So apparently there was some kind of candelabra that you would be able to deconstruct. You'd be able to take a, you have sort of like a main stem of the candelabra, and then you'd have all these candles or these branches coming off of the main stem, and those branches you can remove. And when you're not using it, you take it off. And when you want to use it, you put it together. So if you construct this candelabra on Shabbos, you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. That sounds very similar to the bed that you're literally just putting it together. Now the Brisa continues, Knei sayadin lo yachzer v'michzer pater avalaser. Now this tool of these sayadin, these people who would put plaster on the outside of houses. So they had this tool that they would use, that like this long stick, and they would have these pieces on it, and when they needed to sort of apply plaster to a higher part of the building, so they would extend the stick by adding more pieces to it, more parts to it, and when they needed to get to a lower part of the building where the pole didn't need to be as high, as tall, so they would remove those things. So therefore, because there isn't any objective definition of like when this thing is built versus not built, right? It just depends what your needs are. When it's higher up, you need it taller. When it's lower down, you need it smaller. So you should not be adding and removing parts to this tool on Shabbos. But if you did, it's pater aval aser, since there's no objective, building of this pole. Whereas this menorah, opposed to the menorah, where there is like a definition of when it's built and not, right? When the branches are not on the menorah, so it's not built. When you add the branches to the menorah, it is built. Which is, right, and therefore the bed, there's also like an objectively, it's built when the bed is constructed. When it's deconstructed, it's not built, similar to this menorah. Now Rabbi Simai says, Karen Agula, if you have a round horn, chayiv, Karen Pshuta Pater. Apparently there was some kind of instrument, maybe in the Koran Talmud, there's like a photo of what this is, but there's some kind of horn instrument that Rashi says it was actually kind of like a sieve, right? The round one, which is basically, I guess, some round thing with lots of holes in it, and you would jam these tubes into the holes, and then you would blow into them, and it would make music. So these round horns, you'd have to jam in the tubes very tightly, and therefore it was like you were creating a kli. However, the straight horn, so you wouldn't have to jam in the tubes as lightly, and therefore it would be pater aval aser, I think we said. Yeah. Be seder. No, what's the point of this brisa? What's the kasha? The kasha, as I've mentioned, is from the resha of this brisa, where it says that this menorah, if you construct it, so then you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. Now, that is similar to this bed that if you construct it, you should theoretically also be chayiv a korban chatas like Rav and Shmuel said. So now the question is, how come Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia said that it would be permitted to construct this bed? So here we go. It's because Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia say like the following Tana. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Malbenos Amita. So Malbenos Amita are interesting. So you would have this bed, and the bed had 4 legs, and then you would put these like coverings on the bottom of the legs so that the ground shouldn't rot the bottom of the legs. So almost like shoes, these coverings that you would put on the bottom of the legs. Uchraos Amita, and the legs of the Mita, Vilavachim shel skibas, and some kind of like piece of wood that you put into like a crossbow. Okay? Lo yachzer v'michzer pato avalasa. So you shouldn't put these, attach these things to the bed or to the crossbow. And if you did, so it's pato avalasa. Vilo yiska. And you certainly shouldn't construct these things with like nails, or Rashi really defines like some kind of a wedge, but you shouldn't, make it a permanent, build these things permanently. And if you use like a nail or a wedge in order to secure, the parts of the bed or this crossbow, well then you're going to be chayiv a korban chatas. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, however, if you're simply just like loosely attaching these things, mutter. It's 100% permitted. And therefore, in the case of this bed that, of these traveling merchant people, that it was literally just made up of pieces that you would, fit into each other, and then you have your bed, no tools required, well, in that case, Reb Shimon Gamliel would say it's completely mutter, and that is why Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia were saying that this bed would be permitted to construct. Bei Rav Chama, by the household of Rav Chama, have a mita glalnisa. There was some kind of bed that was essentially very similar to this mita shel trasim, that you would construct by just putting the pieces together without requiring any tools. Have mahadre la biyom atava, and on Yom Tov they would put it together, no problem. So it says here Rava, but there's a note that says it's Rav Chama, which makes sense. So then one of the rabbis there at Rav Chama's house said, "No, Rav Chama, shouldn't this be a problem on Shabbos? How can you construct this bed? My daitech, what makes you think that you can construct it? Binyan min atzadhu. This is building sort of with the shinui. Sure, it's not proper building with tools and nails and things like that, but it's nonetheless constructing something. And hidi isur d'oraisa leka isur d'rabanan mi'aika. And granted that it's not an isur d'oraisa, but at least it should be also midrabanan. So Amar le anu Reb Shimon ben Gamliel svirli to Amar hayirafim mutter. So Rav Chama said, look, I hold like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that as long as they're loosely connected, right, and you're not really, securing them and fastening them with tools and nails and wedges, so then it would be permitted, and that is why Rav Chama would construct these beds on Yom Tov and Mistama Shabbos as well. New Mishnah, very interesting Mishnah. Nosnin kli tachas haner lekabel nitzotzis. So you're permitted to put a kli under a candle on Shabbos in order to receive the sparks that might fall from the candle. Now we had said the other day that you would not be allowed to put a kli under a candle to collect dripping oil, because that would be muktzeh. However, we seem to not have an issue with putting this kli under the candle on Shabbos to receive these sparks. Now says the Mishnah, however, do not put water into this kli that you're putting under the candle, because if you put water in it, then it will be extinguishing these sparks when they fall from the candle into your water. This is very interesting. It gets into grama. Grama means causing something to happen. So here you're not, or at least we're assuming at this point, that you're not mamish extinguishing a spark here. You're just putting a kli with water under a candle. At some point, a spark is gonna fall from the candle, and it'll fall into your water and it'll be extinguished. But it's not like you're like mamish going over to a spark and pouring water on it. You're just leaving some water there, and then the spark will fall and go out on its own. But it's not like you're like mamish extinguishing it. So the Gemara wants to assume that that's grama. Okay. I remember one time, I went for 2 summers to this place called Moresh HaKolel. Very interesting kind of place. Well, depends how you define interesting, I guess. But it was, anyways, so we were eating breakfast one morning over there. Basically, people who just spend their summer learning. Isaac Lebwall, if you're listening, Isaac Lebwall is an alumnus of Moresh HaKolel. He went in high school, which was when you have to be super hardcore. I only went in college. Anyways, so we were at breakfast one morning, and somebody was describing his jury duty, that he had to go to jury duty, and he couldn't really piece together the case. He didn't understand what they were talking about, something to do with skiing or whatever. All he could remember is, it wasn't even a grama. That's all he remembered. Okay. It says the Gemara, but how can you put the kli under this candle? How can you put this kli under the candle? But aren't the sparks that fall going to be muktzeh? And once they're muktzeh, then you won't be able to move this kli anymore because it's containing muktzeh stuff and you can't use it for the rest of Shabbos. And you're basically taking this kli, which you're able to use for whatever you wanted, right? And now you're putting it under the candle to receive the sparks. Now you can't use it anymore for the rest of Shabbos. And as Rav Yosef said, right, in Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and it would be an issue because you're being mevatel kli me'echanu. That would be right. That's how we defined the issue of putting the kli under the candle to receive the oil. So we actually had this question on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and we give the same answer here. Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua nitzotzes ein bohen mamish. But sparks don't have any substance to them, and therefore they're not going to be considered muktzeh. You'll still be able to move the kli after. Even once the sparks fall in there, you don't have to worry about being mevatel kli me'echanu. Weiter. This is interesting. So, and don't put any water, however, into this vessel that you're putting under the candle to receive the sparks, because that will be extinguishing the spark. Now, so the Gemara wants to assume that would be what's called grama. Not exactly doing the malacha yourself, but causing the malacha to happen. You're kind of causing extinguishing to happen. So lema tanan stamak Rabbi Yossi. So let's say that this Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi. De Amar gorem lekibui aser. Because Rabbi Yossi holds that causing extinguishing is permitted, is forbidden. So now the case that Rabbi Yossi is talking about is if you have a fire on Shabbos, okay? So the Chachamim say, this is I think on Kuf Chaf, I think it comes up. They said, Kuf Chaf Amud Aleph. So the Chachamim say, what do you do if you have a fire on Shabbos? So take some vessels that are filled, you can take some vessels, put them around the fire, okay? And in the vessels you can have water, and the fire will come, heat up the vessels will break, and the water will then pour onto the fire and extinguish the fire, and that would be okay. You're not pouring water onto the fire. You're just kind of setting up the scene so that the fire will crack the kli will be filled with water, the water will fall on the fire and extinguish it. That would be acceptable according to the Chacham. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you cannot. You know, if you're using vessels that you know are going to break from the fire, so then you wouldn't be able to put them filled with water around the fire, because you're going to be causing the fire to be put out, and that would be an issue. So we see that Rabbi Yossi holds that gram kibui, causing something to be extinguished, is a problem. So let's say that this Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi. Because this Mishnah, I'm not actually pouring water onto a spark. I'm just putting a bowl, a kli that has water in it, under the candle. And if a spark falls into the water, so it falls into the water. That's grama. And yet we're saying not to do that. So it sounds like it's like Rabbi Yossi, who says that gram kibui, causing extinguishing, is not allowed. V'tizbra, but the Gemara says, do you really think that that's the case? It doesn't make sense to say that. Because Amar de Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Shabbos. I'll say that when Rabbi Yossi says that causing extinguishing is not allowed, is if you're doing this on Shabbos. There's a fire on Shabbos, you take this kli that has water and you put it next to the fire on Shabbos. That would not be allowed. But be'erev Shabbos, mi Amar, but let's say this fire, happens on Erev Shabbos, and you say, I better put out this fire. I don't know why he doesn't just put it out, but in any event, he sets up this situation on Erev Shabbos, or maybe there's a fire there and he wants to make sure that just in case it gets out of control, these kelim are set up so that they'll break and put it out. So maybe he sets this up on Erev Shabbos. So as long as you set it up on Erev Shabbos, then it would be allowed. I assume that he's talking about on Erev Shabbos. So that would be allowed, right? If he sets it up on Erev Shabbos, he puts the kelim there on Erev Shabbos, so then even if the fire then breaks the kli on Shabbos and goes out, then it would be acceptable. Okay? Right? So the Amar of Yossi b'Shabbos, b'Erev Shabbos mi Amar v'chitei ma'achanami b'Shabbos. And if you're going to say, well, this Mishnah is also talking about on Shabbos, right? Meaning we're saying on Shabbos, don't take this kli filled with water and put it under a candle because it would be causing the sparks that fall into it to go out. Just like Rabbi Yossi says that don't put the kli next to the fire on Shabbos because it'll be causing the fire to go out. But we learn in the Brisa, nosnin kli tachas aner lekabel nitzotzos b'Shabbos. So on Shabbos, you're allowed to take this vessel and put it under the candle to receive the sparks. So on Shabbos, ve'in tzarich lo b'Erev Shabbos, and certainly if you can do it on Shabbos, you can do it on Erev Shabbos. However, v'lo yitein mayim, but don't add water to this kli, mipnei shu mechabe, because it's going to be extinguishing the sparks. May Erev Shabbos, don't even do that on Erev Shabbos. Ve'in tzarich lo b'Erev Shabbos, and certainly don't do it on Shabbos. So what do we see? So we see that we're saying that in this case, don't even put the water in the kli from Erev Shabbos, which is even more machmir than Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says don't cause a fire to be put out on Shabbos. But if you set it up on Erev Shabbos, that would be fine. Yet over here we're saying don't even do it on Erev Shabbos. So if it was talking about gram kibui, this grama when it comes to extinguishing flames, well, then this is being even more machmir than the machmir opinion over there. This is even more machmir than Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi would say you'd be allowed to do it on Erev Shabbos. Here we're saying that whatever we're doing with this kli in the water wouldn't even be allowed on Erev Shabbos. So the Gemara says, you know what? Forget it. This is not a grama. This is not a grama. When it comes to gram kibui, when it comes to causing a fire to go out, that would only be on Shabbos. Before Shabbos would be okay. How come you're not allowed to put this kli that has water in it under the flame, under the candle, even from Erev Shabbos? Because this isn't causing extinguishing. This is mamish extinguishing. This is mamish putting out the sparks. How come? It says Rav Ashi, Elo Amar Rav Ashi, Afilu Tema Rabbanon, Shaniachum Pnei Shemekayves Kibuyo. You can even say that this Mishnah is according to the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon who say that when it comes to causing fire to be put out on Shabbos, they say you're allowed to cause fire to be put out on Shabbos. They say that you would be allowed to take a kli that's filled with water on Shabbos and put it next to the fire so that the fire will crack the kli and the water will fall out onto the water and onto the fire and extinguish it. They say that's completely allowed. Yet they would still say that you would not be allowed to take this kli that has water in it and put it under the candle even before Shabbos. What's the difference? So it's very cool. The difference is like this. When it comes to putting, you have a fire on Shabbos, and then you take a kli that's made out of, let's say, cheres, out of earthenware, and you put it next to the flame. So what happens? Basically, you have the water. The water is in this vessel. Now, what happens is the fire gets very close, basically reaches this vessel, heats up the vessel, cracks the vessel. Only at which point does the water pour out, come out of the vessel and put out the fire. Basically, the fire extinguished itself, right? The water was in the kli, and it wasn't going to be extinguishing any flames. The fire then approached the kli, heated up the kli so much that the fire itself, broke the kli, causing the water to come out and extinguish it. That's grama. And the Chacham say that would be allowed even on Shabbos. This is not that. This is literally putting water under a candle so that any sparks that come out of it will literally fall right into the water and go out. So this isn't causing extinguishing. This is mamish extinguishing. This is literally putting water available so that any fire that comes out will be put out by this water. So that's mamish mechabe, and that's why you can't even do that before Shabbos, because when on Shabbos, right, as it says as a gzera, right, I think Rashi says as a gzera, so that you don't come to end up doing it on Shabbos, right? But so there you go. So it's not even a grama, right? This is mamish mechabe. Okay, Hadran alach Kira, very awesome. We will come back to you, Kira. That is great. We just finished the third Perek of Masechta Shabbos. And now we begin the fourth Perek. Bameh tomnin uvama ein tomnin. So what are you allowed to insulate with before Shabbos? On Shabbos you're not allowed to do atmana. What are you allowed to insulate with before Shabbos, and what are you not allowed to? So we already said, I think it was at Daf Lamed Daled, at the end of Amud Aleph, top of Amud Beis, that, let me just double check that that's true. Yeah, it is. So we said over there that you're allowed to do, even during Ben Hashmashos, you're allowed to insulate something with something that is not Mosef Hevel. And even before Shabbos, you would not be allowed to, even B'od Yom, you would not be allowed to insulate something with something that is Mosef Hevel, that increases heat. So what are you allowed to insulate with? What are you not allowed to insulate with? Ein Tom Nilo B'Gefes, you're not allowed to insulate with Gefes. Now we had talked about Gefes in the first Perek of Kira, right? We said that you wouldn't be allowed to insulate, you wouldn't be allowed to light the fire, have a fire made out of these leftover sesame seeds. But Rashi over here explains this as leftover things from the olive press, and the Gemara is going to talk about, is it olive press, is it sesame seeds, what's the deal? With manure, you can't insulate with manure. And I assume that all these things are talking about when they are hot, right? You know, it's kind of similar to like coals. Hot coals are Mosef Hevel, so also hot gefes is Mosef Hevel. Hot manure would be Mosef gefes. V'lo b'melach, hot salt. V'lo b'sid, not lime. V'lo b'chol, not sand. Bein lachin, bein yeveshin, whether these things are moist, where Rashi says they provide significantly more heat, or even if they are dry. Lo b'teven, not with straw. V'lo b'zagin, not with grape peels. V'lo b'mochin, right, from the wine press. V'lo b'mochin, and not with like cloths. V'lo ba'asavin, and not with grass. Bizman shein lachin, but that's only if they are moist. Aval tomnin ben kshen yeveshin, but you can insulate with them when they are dry, because they won't be Mosef Hevel. Ibai aluhu, the Gemara wants to know, gefes shal zeisim tanan? Are we saying that you can't insulate with gefes made out of leftover olives from the olive press? But these leftover sesame, after the oil has been removed from it, so that heat wouldn't be as intense as the leftover olives, and therefore you would be allowed to insulate with sumsimin, gefes of sumsimin. Or dilma de sumsimin tanan, or maybe the gefes in the Mishnah is sumsimin gefes, v'chol shekain tezeisim, and certainly then you would not be allowed to insulate with gefes of olives. Tashma kamanir de amr Abzera mishum chad devei Reb Yanai. The Abzera quotes somebody from the Beis Medrash of Reb Yanai. Kupa, if you have some kind of a box, shetaman ba. So let's say you have a box, and in the box you insulate, you add some cotton or wool or something to insulate the box, and then you put a pot in that box. Also lanicha al gefes shel zeisim, you're not allowed to then put that on top of this very hot gefes of olives. So shma mina shel zeisim tanan. So we see from there that the insulation in the Mishnah is talking about dafka gefes of olives. But the Gemara says, no, that's not a good proof. Because there you're not insulating with the gefes of eitzim. You're insulating with whatever you have inside of that box that you put the pot in. You're then just putting it on top of the gefes of eitzim to, have some heat coming from beneath it, but you're not insulating it with the gefes of the olives. You're insulating with whatever you had in the box. Right? I'll say that when it comes to insulating with gefes, it's even insulating with gefes of sesame. And certainly gefes of olives wouldn't be allowed, right? So leinin atmana de sumsmen nami also leinin asuke avala de zeisim maske avala de sumsmen lo maske avala. But in terms of what releases significant amounts of heat, that you wouldn't be able to take this box that has the insulated pot in it and put it on top of this gefes, well, only the gefes of the olives really release a significant amount of heat, and you wouldn't be able to put this